It's a privilege again to have our chancellor, Dr. Swindoll, here. For those of you who followed his ministry, his productivity has been amazing. His creativity is off the charts. His passion, his communication skills are obviously an inspiration to us all. But for those of us who are completing or near completing a lifetime of ministry, to see what he has done, how he has done it, and we've been the beneficiaries. The most recent contribution is that he has just finished his whole set of New Testament commentaries, and the first half of Matthew is out. The second half will be out very quickly, and that will complete that whole set. And I was checking with him this morning. Hopefully, in the not too distant future, that will be out in electronic form as well. But if you need a great set looking on your shelf, it's well done, looks great. Content is really, really helpful. It's a tool that you'll want to use throughout your life of ministry. Chuck, thank you for being with us, braving the weather today. Thank you for the dedication that it takes to get ready for this. Would you join me in welcoming our Swindoll, Dr. Swindoll?
Oh my, here we are, huh? Good morning.
Good morning.
I have the privilege to speak 3 times this semester, and I'm looking forward to doing that with you today, and then on the 20th of next month, and then the following April, we'll be speaking on the 17th. Both of those dates are on Fridays, and they'll be preview. I think we call them preview days, when we'll have guests looking at the school, considering Dallas Seminary as their place of study. Remember when you were back then thinking about where you were going to go and what it would be like, and here you are, of all things. I want to borrow from Stephen Covey the idea that I'm going to follow these 3 occasions this month, next, and the following, as I talk about habits of highly effective individuals. This month, I want to talk about 6 habits of highly effective people in ministry. Next month will be the subject of 7 habits of highly effective seminary students, and then the last will be 8 habits of highly effective seminaries. So we'll take these 3 in a row. I want to speak to you today, but I'm looking to the future, when you'll no longer be here and you'll be engaged in ministry OYO, on your own. Yep. Right now, you're surrounded by these who set the stage for you, set the table, put together the structure, guide you as you participate in your studies for ministry. But they'll be out of your sight, never fully out of your mind, because they impact you like a few people will in your life, but they'll be in your past. All the structure will be behind you, and you will then be engaged in carrying out your ministry on your own. You have no idea what you'll be doing. You think you do, and there's everything right about that. You're probably wrong, but you have in mind where the Lord's going to be taking you, but He will surprise you again and again and again. So with those surprises in mind, I want to talk with you about being effective, not successful. I think there's a difference. More often than not, being successful is connected to big numbers, to financial profit, to public approval, large crowds, loud applause. And a lot of that has gotten mixed up into the things of the ministry. And they have really nothing to do with great ministry. Nothing. Nothing wrong with success if that's what God plans for you, but personally it brings a lot of extra complicating baggage you have to deal with. So my desire for you and my words to you today and next month and the following will not be along the line of how to become successful. My interest is that you become effective. Now here's the difference. Effective is a better goal because it doesn't bring as many temptations that you have to work your way through, temptations that haunt you and will trouble you. It doesn't feed your ego. Being effective has nothing to do with your ego. It has staying power. It's not temporary. It reaches into and changes the lives of other people. Success doesn't necessarily do that. It also frees you from comparison and competition, which is a very helpful thing because you will fight those two most likely, unless you're very unusual. Furthermore, being effective encourages and emphasizes meaningful relationships. Being successful doesn't. When you are effective, you are close to people, and people want to be close to you. Often when you're successful, they want to hold you at a distance. But effective ministers draw people to them. And the reason is that you begin to model the ingredients and the qualities that they long for. So my desire for you is that you cultivate habits of effectiveness as a minister of the gospel. During my years in ministry, if I may just give you a little sidebar here, I've observed that there are certain perils that are uniquely connected to those in ministry. And at the risk of missing some that I probably should name, I want to name 7 or 8 of these perils, and I'll just click them off. You put them in the back burner, and if you wish, write them down. They can be detrimental to your ministry and even dangerous for you. So before I get into the areas of effectiveness, let me just declare these perils to watch out for. In no particular order, these are the things I've observed that work against an effective ministry. Authoritarianism, I would name. Unaccountability is another. Pride is always near the surface. Exclusiveness is another. Legalism. Lack of self-awareness and self-control. Envy and sensuality. During my years of active ministry since leaving the seminary back in 1963, I've not only observed these things in the lives of others, I've confronted them on occasion, and even there are times in my own life when they rear their ugly heads. It's easy to become, to borrow from Martin Luther, a bore in God's vineyard. And rather than serving the vineyard and being a source of encouragement, you can hurt people, and you can even be engaged in a ministry that becomes toxic if you're not careful, if you're not a good student of yourself. Paul frequently mentions knowing yourself and paying attention to things in your life, and I'll be talking more and more about that. My emphasis today, however, is on our future and your life when you leave this place and you begin to operate on your own. I think you hear that list, and if you're like I would have been when I was a student here, you think, I'm never going to do any of that. I'm never going to be involved in any of that. That's not going to be a problem for me. And I hope you're right. I do. But 1 Timothy 4 and verse 7 is reminder enough regarding your ministry when you're through here, that you're to discipline yourself for the purpose of godliness. You're on your own. Nobody will call you to prayer. Nobody will notice for a while if you don't pray. Your study will be a study you determine. The books you read will be the ones you choose. The way you conduct yourself will be without the oversight of a professor or a mentor, unless you're like a few of us who continue to seek out mentors, realizing the need for them in our lives. Discipline yourself for the purpose of ministry, and I hope these things I mentioned will encourage that, so that the habits you form will help you become more and more effective. Let me begin with a couple of broad brush strokes that Paul doesn't specify in his letters, and I'm limiting my comments to Paul's words to Timothy. But they are two things that he modeled beautifully. The first habit I want to mention is a genuine love for and interest in people. I urge you to cultivate that. What stands out to anyone reading Paul's letters is how many close friends and colleagues he maintained through his life, often naming people once, so we're unfamiliar with them. We don't know the role they played in his life or he played in theirs. But Paul was affectionate. We often think of him as not being that. It occurred to me, he's the one that said, greet one another with a holy kiss. He was a man who had a deep love for and wrote the great treatise on it in 1 Corinthians 13. It isn't uncommon for him to end his letters with a list of names of people that are unfamiliar to us. Look at the very last letter he wrote and just kind of work your way through that the end of the 4th chapter. He begins by urging Timothy to come soon and to bring the cloak and the manuscript and the other things he requests. He mentions Demas, who has forsaken him, but Demas was once close to him And we know very little about Demas. We know really nothing besides what he mentions here. He talks about Luke being with him, verse 11. We know a little of Luke, not a whole lot. We know what he wrote, but he personally, as a physician, traveled with Paul. He says, pick up Mark and bring him with you. That would be John Mark. He mentions verse 12, Tychicus. And then he talks about one who was a thorn in his side, Alexander the coppersmith. And then you'll see at verse 19, greet Prisca and Aquila, a couple that he had left at Ephesus to continue the ministry. The household of Onesiphorus, that name looks like a misprint. We know very little about Onesiphorus. A great statement about him in Ephesus, in the Ephesian letter. Erastus in verse 20. Trophimus in verse 20, whom he left sick at Miletus. Eubulus he mentions in verse 21. Pudens, Linus, Claudia, and all the brethren. Here's a list of people that you and I know very little about. He had a place in his heart for people. I want to urge you, because some of you need this urging. You're connected to your studies. You're not real friendly. I notice that when I speak to you. You often just walk right on straight ahead. That's okay. But it won't be okay in ministry. That's one of the first things your congregation will notice about you. I know you're happy, but some of your faces haven't found that out, and so you don't smile, and you don't see a real need to smile. Your congregation will notice that, and they'll notice you don't look friendly, you don't seem friendly. Believe me, that will affect their response to your ministry. You come across as studious, and there's everything good about that. But you can also mix with it a warmth and an affection that goes over really well with people, and it will help you if you will cultivate that. Care about their heartaches. Listen to them when they speak to you. Look them in the eye and don't look around them when they're talking to you. Drill into them so that they feel like they're the only one in the church at the moment they're talking to you. Make a habit of that. Cultivate that. Learn good eye contact. Have a good, strong handshake. Mean it when you ask how people are. Learn their names. It's not uncommon for pastors to be at a church for quite some time but not know the names of the flock. A most important thing to an individual, believe it or not, is his or her name. Learn it. Make sure you're pronouncing it correctly. That also is helpful. Let them see the cracks in your life. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable with your congregation, with those that you're ministering to or those you're teaching. Tell them how much you love them and use that word. Express gratitude for them. I do that regularly with our elders. There are few elder meetings we have where I don't, before we're breaking up, where I don't pause and say, let me just look around the room and tell you, man, how much you mean to me. And how much I need you. And that's true of the congregation as well. I will say to a congregation on occasion, the joy you bring me, it cannot be put into words. And I'm not blowing smoke on them. I really mean that. I can't imagine my life without a flock of people. We have a family in our church who just recently have had a real good experience. Their son has just signed on with Yale, He graduated #1 scholar in the high schools, and he's an All-American football player in high school and will go and play ball for Yale. He's in for some surprises, I think, when he plays ball for Yale, but that's another subject. He's played for McKinney and made everything, and now they're signing with Yale, and it means a lot to the family. So I just added to my day sending a little text to the son, whose name is Mitchell, and to his daddy, who happens to be a part of our staff. And I congratulated them on this milestone that they were experiencing together. His daddy told me later he just paused and read the text to his family. I mentioned that not to make me look good, because more often than not, I would forget to do that. But when I remembered to do it, it is amazing what it meant to the family. It's just amazing. It means more than you realize. And that was more than I expected. I just thought Mitchell would go, boy, that's nice. Preacher said, congratulations, that's good. I mean, they stopped and actually read what I wrote and listened to it. And I was thrilled to be a part of their the day of celebration. Enter into the grief of your friends. Weep with those that weep. Let it out. Tell them you care, but don't say it unless you mean it. Pray with your wife about that family going through a really tough time. Let the people impact your life. You'll be a better person for it. And you'll endear yourself to them for a lifetime. Care about other people, please. I'll even be strong enough to say, if you don't really enjoy people, search your heart as to whether you should really be in ministry. Amen. You need to touch the lives of other people. They want to know that they matter. Believe me, when they know they matter, they will listen as well as you're listening right now. Because you've entered into their world. You got the point. Second habit, let your passion show through and run free. I'm still in 1 Timothy 4 here, and I look at the opening words of verses 11 to 16. Just run down there with me, will you? Just look at the word. Just look at the opening volley of each one. Prescribe and teach, verse 11. Let no one look down on your youthfulness. Show yourself an example, those who believe. Give attention to public reading. Don't neglect spiritual gift within you. Take pains with these things. Be absorbed in them. Pay close attention to them. It's like he's building to a climax. He is. He's writing to Timothy, who apparently was a little shy, a little reluctant, rather sickly. He's saying to Timothy, step up. Walk into this ministry that God's given you with passion and with zeal, enthusiasm. And when you do that, you will become contagious. People love to be around individuals who are enthusiastic about life. And they don't lose their enthusiasm as the years stack up. Several things will help you in building this passion and letting it run free. A positive outlook on your opportunity, whatever it may be that God opens up for you. A good sense of humor always helps. It doesn't mean that you tell a lot of jokes. That's not necessarily a good sense of humor. A sense of humor really just kind of comes out at times, and people chuckle along with you, or they enjoy the fact that you don't take yourself all that seriously. Pump up the volume, by the way. Don't mumble. Some of you are really... well, I'm not going to say that. That wouldn't be helpful. But you need to cultivate some skills of speaking so that folks can hear you and understand as you articulate your words. If I learned one thing sitting to the right of my father at our dining room table, it was to speak up. And he would look at me and say, "Speak up, son." After I get over the shock, I would speak up. And I've certainly learned that lesson. When Cynthia would bring our babies home to begin life in our home, they'd spend their first week jumping when I'd speak to them, because I'd usually go, "Come on," like this, and they finally learned that's just Dad. That's just the way he is, Keep your prayer life vital and active. Don't let the evening news shape your attitude. If it's getting to you, shut it off. There's very little on the evening news that's worth watching. And the other night, Cynthia and I decided just to shut it down. I'm so sick of those people arguing with each other and yelling at each other and unforgiving and all that. I don't need more of that. I fight enough of that in my own nature. I don't need it lived out for me on the television. My passion is affected when I watch people who are passionless, except when they're attacking others. Learn, by the way, to show gratitude. I spoke on that a moment ago, and your passion will begin to run free. Run free. So cultivate a love for other people and an interest in them. Let your passion show through and run free. Now we're ready for chapter 6. He sort of does a list of things for us here in this 6th chapter. I'm going to give you 4 words that will be the sort of the headings. I may not use them, but they'll be the headings for my 4 final habits I want to mention. Flee, follow, fight, and fasten. Those are not original with me. I borrowed them from Kent Hughes in his book on the pastoral letters. Flee, follow, fight, and fasten. Those are sort of the guidelines that you could trace through chapter 6 of 1 Timothy, beginning verse 3, almost to the end. So here's habit number 3. Flee from all that characterizes phony leaders. You prefer run, use that word. Run from all that characterizes the phony. Anything that smacks of phony, have nothing to do with. Verse 11, he talks about that. Flee from these things, you man of God. And these things, you've got to look back up through 3 through 10 to see the context. Flee from these things. And you'll go back to verse 3. If anyone advocates a different doctrine, and he starts in there with one of the characteristics of a phony leader. He teaches what is false. His doctrine is weak, if not altogether in error. Stay away from that. Keep your doctrine sharp by staying in the study. Another one he mentions in verse 4, he is conceited. Characteristic of phony leaders is conceit. They understand nothing, says the apostle. Another characteristic is in verse 4 at the end. They are divisive. Look at how he puts it. Their interest is in controversial questions and disputes about words and out of which arise envy and strife and abusive language and evil suspicions. All of that is divisive, and it'll stir up a congregation, a body of people, the people you are teaching, whatever may be your audience. Stay away from divisiveness. And of course, he mentions at the end of verse 5, they think that godliness is a means to gain, having in mind making money. Greed is what he's referring to. Look at verse 9. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare, many foolish and harmful desires which plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. Some longing for it have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves through with many griefs. Again, you read that list, you think, I'm not going to get like that. That's not going to be me. I studied at Dallas Seminary. I never saw profs that were greedy or divisive or conceited or taught anything but the right kind of truth. I'm not going to go there, but you're not on your own. When you're on your own, let me visit with you in 10 or 15 years. See how you're doing without the structure around you. You see, you leave all of this when you walk away from here. You're in the minority instantly, and you will be for the rest of your life as the minister of the gospel. Is everything good about that? But it's also easy in the minority to want to fall in with the group. And I said what I said about people so you wouldn't think I'm encouraging exclusiveness, but choose carefully who you run with. Your pursuits are to be godly pursuits. Here you're surrounded by those who know you and hold you accountable. Then that won't be true unless you invite that. Want to know the truth? You'll need to run for the rest of your life. You'll need to run away from things the rest of your life. In fact, especially chapter 2 of 2 Timothy, look at it, 2:22. I'll give you another flea to consider. Flee from youthful lusts. You've already been warned again and again about moral failing, and you are convinced you'll never fall. You have no way of being convinced of that. You're going to be tempted as soon as you leave this place, and even before you leave. And it's not just a lust for sex. All kinds of lust for power and control. You are effective in your ministry, and before long you'll be tempted to take control of things and to lust for attention and admiration. There's along with that, you'll become well known, quite likely, in the community, because ministers who are effective become known in the community, and they are in demand on occasion. People will ask you to speak at places, and you'll get used to the applause, and you'll get used to large honoraria, and you'll be doing it for the honoraria if you're not careful. And you'll fall into the trap of loving the money that's in it. You may write a book that's successful, and the publisher will do his or her job, and they'll sell that book, and it'll bring in an income that supplements your smaller income you're making where you're serving, and before long you're worth an amount of money. You're thinking right now as a student, that's not a bad idea to be worth a little more than I'm worth right now. And there's nothing wrong with making money. There's nothing wrong. God never attacks the rich just because they're rich. He attacks what happens to you when you get rich. And very few can maintain a balance. Very few remain generous when they get rich. Getting rich makes no one generous if you're not generous when you're poor. And when you are generous, and then you gain a little income, you can't wait to give more of it away. But the temptation will be to get more. And I'll just be crass about it. You'll think about it, boy, I'd like to do that wedding. I wonder what I'd make if I did their wedding. Put a check on that in your life. Let's just agree to do that. And stop taking money for funerals. It always bothered me that people would take money for doing a funeral. You're laying somebody to rest. That family's grieving. Give them that check back. There's everything beautiful about that. Furthermore, it's good for your battle with possessions. You don't need that. You're not that desperate. But you're the one that has to put a check on it. No one will be looking over your shoulder. And before long, you'll find yourself, if you're a successful writer, writing the book for what you're going to get out of it. And your publisher will even encourage that. I don't know how many times Cynthia and I have said again and again and again and again to every publisher, we're not in it for that. Forgive me for yelling, but I'm passionate about that. And they just don't get it because they're around it all the time. And the reward people get in America for good work and whatever is money. It's money. And he warns us about money here. He warns us. And again, I want to make it clear, there's nothing wrong with making money. What's wrong is what happens to you when you get more than you need. And your heart isn't right. And you change. Don't tell me you won't change. I've seen it over and over and over and over, even with people in ministry. I'm talking straight to you about habits that you form that will help you. And if you don't form the habits, you'll get sucked into it. So, run. Run. Run fast. By the way, it's a good little thing to remember. You can't lust while you're running. I learned that in the Marine Corps. Boy, they brought all these beautiful women to the island to service the Marines like we're animals. Well, some of them were. And here were all these gorgeous women they brought on the island, 5,000 at one time, prostitutes. And I said to the guy that led our Bible study, I said, you know, I get off the jitney and I've got a little ways to walk between where I get off the bus and when we get to the Bible study. And you know, it's tempting walking along there. I'm a married man. My wife's 8,000 miles away. And he said, I'm going to give you a tip. Run. And I'm not kidding you. When I started running, I didn't notice anybody was attractive at that point, man. My desire was to get up the hill and make it to the Bible study. And it worked. So keep running. Keep running. Habit number 4. Model true contentment wherever God calls you. Model true contentment. We see this at the beginning of verse 6. Godliness actually is a means of great gain when it's accompanied by contentment. Isn't that a great line? Isn't it great? John R.W. Stott writes, Paul's word for contentment is the regular term used by the Stoics for contentment. It means self-sufficient, which is altogether independent of circumstances. I like the way that reads. Contentment does not depend on external things. Thus he writes in Philippians 4, I've learned to be content. Whether I'm abounding or without enough food. Whether I have plenty or I'm in want. Philippians 4:11-13. One of the greatest benefits of learning contentment, don't miss this, it puts the brakes on covetousness. You will envy less when you are contented. Just settle in. You're where God's called you. Let me give you a tip. There will always be a larger church. There will always be a bigger salary. There will always be better weather. There will always be greater prestige. There will always be more benefits. And you'll tell yourself, there will always be nicer people in the congregation if I go there. Here's a very important principle. The grass is not only not greener, it's not even edible on the other side of the fence. Invariably, you may have better weather, but you'll run into people that were worse than what you left. Or you'll find yourself in a situation that has got trials that you didn't have earlier. So no matter where you are, settle in. Stay there. Unless God clearly is leading you to move, stay. Hang in there. Find contentment in it. Be known as one who gave it the long haul. By the way, he comes to the end of verse 11. Look at this. I don't want you to miss something here. Verse 11. Flee from these things, man of God. Pursue righteousness, God and his faith, love, perseverance, and gentleness. Those two last words, easy to run past them. Perseverance and gentleness includes patience with difficult, petty, and troubled people. You'll be around them all your life. I mean, where else are they going to go? Think about it. They don't hang around a civic center. They don't have the money to go to big ball games. Church is free. And there's somebody that acts like they care about them, and so they show up. And you're the one that has to deal with them. Hendricks used to say, wherever there's light, there's bugs. And you will encounter the bugs. You'll need perseverance and gentleness. Stay contented. Quick little review. Cultivate a love and interest in people. Let your passions show through and run free. Flee from all that characterizes phony leaders. Model true contentment wherever God calls you. God will give you the grace to endure. Habit number 5. Here we go. Stand firm during days of conflict. They can be agonizing. Now, when he writes, fight the good fight of faith. It isn't the word fight. It's agona, agonizomai. There's agony in this word. It's difficult to tell whether Paul had in mind combat in warfare, which has its own agony, or physical agony when you work out in a gym or when you are in competition in athletic contests. Either one fits. It's the opposite of passivity. You agonize through days of conflict. So I'm deliberately staying away from fight because there's too much fight in most of us anyway. The ministry includes days when you must agonize through the conflict. If it's worth your contending for it, contend without becoming contentious. We don't need more contentious people in ministry. Face the struggles head on. Don't back away from them. If you must deal with them, struggle through them. Guard against developing a narrow-minded, defensive, fight-back kind of ministry. It's a principle worth standing for. Stand and agonize through it, but don't look for a fight. You can disagree without becoming disagreeable. It's always been one of my goals. You can hold your convictions without insulting those who don't agree with you. To me, it's a sign of an intelligent ministry. It's to deal with opponents, and you will always have them. Just last Sunday, had a man come to the front and opposed several things I had made comments about. And he has every right to hold to that opinion. He's wrong, but he has every right to hold to those. And you know, when he left me, he wasn't mad at me, and I wasn't mad at him. I'm determined to treat him with respect. He's going to be there next week, looking for something else. It's okay. It's easy to create your own agony. This is a good agony. Every generation, it seems, has a calling they must stand for, this one included. That's a good agony. Think clearly, stand your ground, state your position, disagree with opponents when you must, then get over it. Unlike the politicians, get over it. Get over it. Don't hold it back in some life because they disagreed with you. Don't blackball them. You know what? You may live long enough to realize they were more right than you thought they were. When you discover that's true, be man or woman enough to go back and say, you know what? I found that what you commented on is more right than I was. Thank you for pointing that out. So that's the fifth habit, stand firm during days of conflict. They can be agonizing. Finally, sixth, develop a stick-to-it attitude when it comes to your calling. Develop a stick-to-it attitude. Determined to stay at your calling regardless. Be relentless. Consistently seize it for the long haul. Paul says as much as that when he talks about it. I charge you in the presence of God who gives life to all things in Christ Jesus, who testified the good confession that you keep the commandment without stain or reproach until the appearing of our Lord Jesus. Hang on to it. You've been ordained into this. It isn't a temporary ordination. hanging right there in my study, not only what I received when I graduated from the seminary, but my ordination. It's right in front of where I study, dated. And the ordination council, 8 men who checked out every detail they could for 2.5 hours. I was the only one in that ordination exam. And I committed myself to a lifetime of ministry, and I promised them, if you will endorse me, I will stay at it for the rest of my life. I will seize it, and I will never give up in this thing called ministry. And they believed me. It's possible to possess something but not embrace it. So stay engaged in the full spectrum of ministry. Grab it for all it's worth. Grab the reins and ride that thing to the end. Best-selling author Annie Dillard heard of a man who, after accidentally shooting an eagle in the sky, thinking it to be a hawk, examined it. He found that the dry skull of a weasel was fixed to the neck by the jaws of this weasel. Evidently, months earlier, when the eagle had swooped down and pounced on the weasel, the animal turned and bit into it. With determination, held on. Even though torn and eviscerated, the weasel had refused to let go and ultimately became an airborne skull. Boy, is that a vivid image or what? Dillard, while reflecting on it, that unusual scene, offers these words, and I quote her. I think it would be well and proper and obedient to grasp your one necessity and not let it go. I love that. Seize it, she writes. Seize it. Even until your eyes burn out and your bones unhinge and scatter. Close quote. From her book, Teaching a Stone to Talk. That's the ministry. Seize it. Don't play with it. You're in this thing. Wherever God calls you. For however long you're alive. When joining the ranks of ministry, you're joining an eternal body of essentials. Something never to be treated half-heartedly. When you seize the reins and stay fastened to it, riding it for all it's worth to the end, you will know the joy of truly following Christ and taking up your cross and dying for him. Amy Carmichael put it like this: give me the love that leads the way, the faith that nothing can dismay, the hope no disappointments tire, the passion that will burn like fire. Let me not sink to be a clod. I love that line. Let me not sink to be a clod. Make me thy fuel, flame of God. Lord, we love you and we fight the flesh. We struggle with stuff. We can preach this, but living it is such a big job. And following through to the end is our assignment. May we have the tenacity of that weasel to bite into this thing called ministry. May we do it with our whole heart, holding nothing back. And may it become for us a lifestyle, not something we perform or act out. Enable us to really be this with our whole heart and soul and mind and strength. In Jesus' name. Everybody said?